going to introduce the candidates?
I can do that now, yes. Just give me a second. Yes, Dr. Hussein.
So good
Good
night, everyone.
evening. Oh, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our national conversations sessions that the Trade and Economic Development Unit of the University of the West Indies has been hosting. We have transitioned our conversation platform to a virtual one, given our circumstances. And this evening's session, we are going to be talking about the implications of the COVID-19 situation on our education sector. We have three presenters this evening, Dr. Rhonda Duqua, Ms. Antonia Ferreira, and Dr. Boindranath Tawari. To start off our presentation, I'm going to invite our coordinator for the Trade and Economic Development Unit, Dr. Roger Hossain, to offer some contextual statistics on some of the situations that we are facing. Dr. Hussein, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Gookool. Good night, everyone. Are you all seeing my screen, Rebecca?
Yes, Dr. Hussein, we are seeing the screen.
Okay. So I would just do...
Put it on slideshow.
Yeah, I'm going to do that now. I would just do a few introductory slides and let the educational specialists we have three of them. Dr. Tiwari, a former principal. Dr. Duqua currently does work on online educational issues. And we also have the new president of Tutor. So this is the total cases here of COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago as of August 27, 1,426 cases. That is something that we are all still very startled by. It has really taken off since about the 25th of July. The dynamics of the situation is what is really of tremendous concern, in that in the recent past, we have seen an explosion in the number of cases. In fact, today there were 78 cases as we speak, which is quite high for a small country like ours. Currently, we have 867 people infected. These numbers would change with whatever numbers come out today. But that's still quite a high number of infected people, active cases for this small country. What is alarming is that deaths have started to increase. We also had, I believe, 4 deaths today. So the numbers...
Dr. Hussein, did we lose you? Folks, I think we may have lost Dr. Hussein there for a few minutes. Just as a matter of continuing our conversation, the situation with COVID in Trinidad and Tobago is a concerning one. It's concerning for each one of the sectors involved, and particularly for the education sector, where you have a large amount of students who have not been able to effectively transition to those online systems. Definitely some of these issues we are going to raise this evening. So as I invite our panelists, I'm going to ask Dr. Duqua to offer her presentation first, Ms. Antonia, and then Dr. Tawari. For everyone else, I would like to kindly ask if you please mute your microphone, as this will help to improve the delivery of the overall program this evening. And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Duqua. You can go ahead and share your screen with us. Rhonda, you're going to have to unmute your mic and share the screen if you have a presentation ready.
Yes. So, hello. Are you seeing my presentation?
No, not as yet.
Something is different. Yeah, something is different about this one. All right, perhaps I can read it through while I am.
And to the audience, I would like to also alert you to our chat function where you can put in your questions or your comments.
All right, so I'm not seeing the same thing as we did yesterday in the dry run, Miss Dr. Gookool. So I'll have to speak it through as I go through the slides. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share it with the audience. I don't know what is happening. So let me take you all through the presentation. The slide 3 is about presentation contents. So in this presentation, I'm going to set the context, followed by advantages of online education through a learning management system. And that learning management system is explained as the online platform through which teaching learning activities are facilitated. In this particular empirical study, I use the Google Classroom to facilitate learning among students. So more of that will be revealed as we go along. Followed by limitations of online education through LMS and implications for policy makers. So the context, recognize that this is taken from my latest manuscript published August 2020, entitled Students Transition from Face-to-Face to Online Learning at Higher Education, a Case Study in Trinidad and Tobago, published in Education Research and Review number 15. So the context is basically tertiary education, a class of 15 students, 10 females, 5 males, and students' ages range from 18 to 54 years old. It was a transition from face-to-face to online education with the onset of COVID-19. They had 15 weeks of online instruction, and students were pursuing a mathematics general education course during the time of data collection. And I use interviews and questionnaires to collect data accordingly. Following, we have the advantages. As students stated, advantages of using the LMS system at tertiary education. The first one, and students were quite vocal about this one, is that the LMS encourages students to be independent learners. So an independent learner is one who takes responsibility for his or her own learning. The learner initiates research materials and any other materials that may help him or her in understanding class material. So students found themselves going online, accessing the materials and being more open to materials online that they can understand rather than depending on the face-to-face interaction of the teacher to make everything clear. The second advantage students outlined was that the LMS is cheaper. They did not have to print assignments. They did not have to purchase textbooks. They used the materials the lecturer shared with them together with online resources. Thirdly is that the LMS was accessible from home or workplace. Recognize these are adults. Some were working, some were home during the COVID-19 first shutdown, and they found it quite convenient to either access the session, the 3-hour session, 3-hour online session, learning teaching session from home, or if they were at work, from workplace. And the final advantage I'll put forward is that students feel safer having the LMS because crime is a deterrent to our tertiary education students during the night. To travel from the tertiary education institution to their homes, students have shared experiences of being held up with me. And therefore, they were very quick to say it is a safer mode of education for them. Some of the limitations students outlined were, in the first place, socialization is stymied. So this was also stated by Deming, Golden, Katz, and Yuktan 2015 that within the online education, courses such as mathematics are better understood when they interact with one another or with the teacher face-to-face. They found that they missed that socializing component of learning. Second limitation was that home distractions interrupted the teaching learning process. And they found it difficult at times to focus and concentrate on academics. Recognize these are adults, some of them were children, and the children tended to have little emergencies that caused them to leave the teaching learning interface and attend to the children. The third limitation listed is that practical courses were postponed due to the COVID-19 policies. Now, these students look forward to graduation. And when these practical courses, such as emergency management, are delayed or postponed, you delay students' graduation, and that halts or delays their own progress in terms of their academic achievement. Students at tertiary education are not appreciative of postponing their graduation dates. And then the internet bandwidth causes interruptions in teaching and learning processes. As a final limitation that I listed here this evening, students, especially in rural areas, need to have a reliable bandwidth access, internet access, so that, especially around the hours of 5 to 8, when all tertiary education institutions seem to be online, the internet bandwidth decreases, and therefore students have problems continuing with the teaching and learning process. Ever so often, I'll find it strange that students just leave, but the truth is they did not leave the teaching and learning interface or the site, but rather that the internet dropped. That causes an interruption in their learning processes. The final aspect of the study, which I'd like to share with you all, is called implications. What we suggested and what students suggested is that we have a blended learning approach, 40% face-to-face and 60% online for mathematics and practical courses. Now, somewhere along the line, we're going to have to recognize this COVID-19 is here to stay for a long time. It is the new normal, right? It is the transformed normal, and therefore waiting for COVID-19 to be over to continue with practical courses for our students may be unproductive, to say the least. Then in terms of having the practical courses, we can have simulations for emergency management type courses or practical courses, so that the excuse is not that students are not able to do the practical component, but we have to look at alternative forms of assessment, such as simulation, such as presentations, live debates, so that students are able to continue with their courses of study. The third implication is that facilitators can set up chat rooms and allow students time to interact during the 3-hour session, so that the socializing component is fulfilled as far as the teaching learning process is taking place. And finally, I'm suggesting that students who wish to attend classes at the institution because of home background noise or interruptions should be accommodated by administrators with face masks and other mandatory personal protective wear. It is the new or transformed normal. We have to put things in place so that students are able to continue with their education, so that they are able to graduate at the right time. Hence my presentation. Over to you, Dr. Gookool.
Dr. Duka, thank you very much for your conversations and for contextualizing some of the things that you have found over your study. At this time, I would like to hand over to our tutor representative, Ms. Antonia de Freitas, and I would also like to remind you that you can post your comments via our chat. We would also be giving you an opportunity to unmute your mic and speak to the panelists directly. So in order to do that, I would like to ask you to use the raise hand function on your screen. Miss Antonia, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Good evening, everyone. And I hope we are all safe and well. Good evening, fellow panelists, Dr. Dubra and Dr. Tawari. This evening, I want to put some unpleasant facts, some unpleasant truths into the conversation. We are talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the education system of Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, we will learn the lessons from other jurisdictions, but we will not make the mistakes as well. So I would want to just present 3 things for us to consider as we go forward. I will look at the impact of COVID-19 on various stakeholders, a subset. I will talk a bit about the issues related to education planning in this current scenario and the way forward. And I would just want to make a few comments about building resilience into the education system. Now, colleagues, friends, viewers, listeners, I would want to present some scenarios concerning parents, first of all, because we have heard of many challenges that parents have faced. So consider these. 1, I'm a single parent. My son is autistic. He didn't understand why he could not go to school. So he acted out and he misbehaved frequently. I'm seeing Dr. Dukwa shaking her head. Real scenarios, yes. My husband and I managed our household expenditure together. During the closure, he lost his job as a construction worker. Things were difficult financially. Another parent. Having the gaps in cancer treatment created extreme depression for my wife, and it negatively affected my children. As we know, during the period of confinement, certain services were limited. Last parent I want to reference, and this is a very personal one. My husband died on Labor Day. He was 40 years old, and our eldest daughter has to do SCA. I don't know what to feel. And I'm sure we can all relate countless experiences that parents went through, countless hardships. Here is where I want us to take off. All of these parents are educators. All of these parents went through these crises, and some of them are still going through different situations because of how COVID-19 impacted on them and on their families. So the first point is that in this unprecedented situation, we must not consider picking and choosing who to empathize with and who to sympathize with. Many of our education professionals expressed some degree of primary traumatic stress because they were concerned about themselves and their families. But by the same token, these same educators, many of them have also been experiencing secondary traumatic stress because they're concerned about the girl who lives in a particular environment where she is abused. They have been concerned about that child and his family who've not been able to eat properly because of loss of income within the family. So what we need as we recover from this pandemic and as we build resilience into our education system, first of all, is a proper psychosocial network to support everyone. Education professionals at all levels in all categories, parents and students. That requires a level of cross-agency, cross-ministerial collaboration at all levels. The United Nations, Education International, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, all reference the fact that there needs to be multi-level and multi-sector collaboration. The second point in terms of the crisis planning, when we plan under normal circumstances for the education system, we look at definitive goals, we look at sector challenges, we do a relevant diagnoses and chart our way forward. In the crisis, we are not allowed the time to do those things, so that the crisis-sensitive planning must consider particular issues. They must consider certain terms and conditions of the employers, of the employees. And that comes back to how COVID-19 impacted education professionals. It was easy enough to say, and it still is, that teachers must be able to connect with students online. Teachers must be able to engage the students. But what we have to look at now is the fact that we must facilitate for education practitioners a level of support provided by the Ministry of Education, by the school principal, by the community, by the parents. We would have heard the Minister of Education this morning reference the fact that parents need to be involved in this whole process. Teachers can't do it alone. We really can't do it alone, friends. We also need, as we look at how it has impacted, appropriate tools and training. Now, Dr. Dukwa mentioned in her study the issue of online learning and blended learning. That is but one aspect of the tools, the resources that we need to deliver to our charges. There must also be, if we are looking at the impact of COVID on educators, and we are looking at how we are going to plan properly, there must also be clear expectations. When you as a parent, for example, have the smartphone and you have to take your phone and you go to work with you, during the course of the day, the child is not able to connect with the teacher. So where does that bring us? It brings us to the matter of flexi time, or as the International Labour Organization has put it, the issue of teleworking. Does our legislation, do our collective agreements, do our practices facilitate that kind of flexi working online to reach the students? There are some educators telling me that they have agreed of their own accord to engage the students 5 o'clock in the evening, 6 o'clock in the evening, when the parents reach home and they can give the child the smartphone. That may not work for everybody. So in looking at planning and the crisis sensitive planning, not only must we look at psychosocial support and how the crisis has impacted, but we must also look at the terms and conditions. We must also seek to plan for the provision of training. We must also seek to plan for the provision of clear expectations. Now, one of the interesting things is that the teachers are expected to be engaged with the students, and the Ministry of Education and the tutor will provide certain guidelines in terms of the length of time for engagement. If the teacher has to go to school, as the minister has said, to utilize school resources to reach the children, then the teacher might decide to do that. What happens to the teacher's children in that period? Have we planned for that? And it takes me back to my first point about empathy for everybody and the fact that one of the things COVID-19 did for educators is disrupt significantly the work-life balance. I want to very quickly turn to the issue of building resilience. The schools have been closed since March 13th. Initially, we were operating in an emergency remote learning and teaching situation. The ministry is attempting to put something more structured in place. As we look at building resilience into our education system, friends, we are not just talking about the training and the resources. We are talking about maintaining certain levels of funding in the face of the possible declining revenue because of situations that have been impacted by global supply and demand. Challenges caused by COVID-19, and they will come to meet us here locally. So we still have to consider maintenance of our school plants over the next few months. We still have to consider the issue of provision of connectivity and devices. And both the President of Tutor and the Minister of Education have appealed to stakeholders to join in that regard to support our students. As we look at building resilience into our education system, we must As we look at building resilience into our system, we must understand that we must be able to plan for crises going forward. Thank you very much.
Ms. Antonia, thank you very much for your presentation. The contents definitely resonated with me, as I'm sure it would with each person included in the chat here this evening. And it brings us to a really nice place where I can ask Dr. Tawari, given the fact that he is an educator himself, he would have sat at the helm of one of the region's leading tertiary institutions at the UWI, and he would have also sat in the place of policy at the Ministry of Planning. So I'm hoping that in the conversations that unfold, some of the issues that you raise can be addressed. Dr. Tawari, go ahead. Dr. Tawari, you're going to have to unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Tiwari.
Right, excellent. Good evening, everybody. Ms. Dukwa, Dr. Hussein, the head of tutor, Antonia, Ms. Antonia, Rebecca, and all participants on the chat. I must say I was quite touched by the two presentations. One of them really outlined the impact of COVID on one particular class and the learning. And the second one really looked at the COVID experience and its impact on education. I'm not sure at what level, I assume at secondary level. And because of what we are learning about what is happening in this COVID period, it really asked the question whether maybe we should not be thinking about how we rethink education and education delivery and support systems, and secondly, how we plan for it, including other crises. And I must say both of those are very important and relevant. I want to take a system approach because I'm not unique to any particular institution or tradition now or level. And I want to ask the question, what is education for, if not to help us to think, first of all, to cope with the world that we are living in, to be able to identify problems, to find solutions to these problems, to adapt to conditions as they emerge, and of course, to change the world and conditions through creative or innovative interventions. And I think what we've been seeing if I take a systems view of what is happening, is that COVID has done this to us wherever we live in the world. There is social distancing, there is self-protection and protection of others. There is the invisible spread, which we've come to understand. And we understand that it's really bad because one can be infected without showing any symptoms, or without even being aware of it. And what that has done is made us fearful of crowds, gatherings, meetings, comminglings. All these things have become undesirable. And therefore, the face-to-face classroom, which constitute elements of all of these things, have become a problem for us in education. But the big question is it desirable to shut teaching and learning down? I think all of us would answer no, and I think the world has already answered no. So closing schools for COVID, even if we do it, must not mean the end. And I want to go quickly without formally answering that question to exams. I will come to it. I want to ask the same question for exams. Should we shut down exams? Well, we in Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere provided for one-day SEA exam by preparing for it as a one-time event under conditions of social distancing with effective observance of protocols, including going straight to exam and back home. So we now know, as we look at the education system, that events of relatively short duration, up to a day, maybe even 2 days, can be prepared for and executed using proper protocols. So that the problem with classroom teaching and learning is not holding a class. That can be done effectively under strict COVID protocols and proper rules. You get there, you have the learning under proper conditions, and you go back to your point of origin. The problem is the social access and social mingling that comes with a gathering of people for a range of classes. After the class, among themselves, and in the institution of hundreds or thousands of people. You have recess, you have lunch, you have play, you have social interaction, travel to and from, and all of these things spell danger outside of the classroom setting. So one-off events properly prepared for and with clear, strict rules effectively adhered to are still possible, although that is slipping away now because of community spread. And once you get beyond effective containment to community spread, then the possibility of even having a closed event properly managed becomes very difficult. And that is why we have moved to the technology, online learning, seminars, webinars, public education through Facebook, whatever allows, hello? Whatever
Yes, Dr.
allows the
Tawari, go
teacher
ahead.
to speak, whatever allows the teacher to speak, write, illustrate to a student, and allows the student to television, you can do it on YouTube. My grandson is on YouTube all the time learning things. There is Google, of course, and Blackboard. And we must not forget that the telephone we have in our hand also has a camera, which is a very important tool for sharing and learning, an important part of the learning platform. Now, we have to think of all the levels of education and what is the appropriate technology that need to be applied to suit each level. I mean, I would hardly be able to come up to the answers for preschool, but I know, for instance, my daughter is wrestling with that because she has a 5-year-old kid and a 2-year-old kid. I am not sure what they will be for primary and how it will be different for special education and for secondary, for technical vocation and for tertiary, and how it might be different for undergraduate, let's say, which is more class intensive, and graduate. But I do want to raise some issues that have to do with the application of the education to these different levels. The first one is pedagogy. We cannot forget, even in this COVID time, that whatever the adaptations or the innovations or the transformations or the dislocations that we put into place, whatever we do, part of education is social in nature, and it is meant to support social development and therefore human development. There's that aspect of it. It's not just learning the content or passing the exam or learning the content and moving on to more content. It is that human development and social aspect. The second aspect of pedagogy is what you might call critical thinking. That is to say, learning critically so that you can break down and deconstruct various ideas, worldviews, etc. And so that Ms. Dukwa talked about self-learning and self-development and independent learner so that you can develop that capacity to think for yourself and learn. The third element is being culturally responsive. In Trinidad and Tobago, this is essential because you have a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. And therefore, this is critical in that process. And therefore, the issue of race, cultural diversity, human relations, the notion of self in the context of how you are located in the system, but being part of the human race, that is very, very much a part of the education paradigm. And the fourth thing is this Socratic method, which is essentially education for democracy, in which you challenge assumptions and you create knowledge by engaging thoughts and experiences and sharing dialogue. And these things, we have to be careful that in renovating the education to accommodate COVID, we do not lose all of these things in the process. So I think I will stop at this point and allow somebody else to contribute, and I would be happy to answer any question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tawari, for your contribution and to the rest of the panel as well. At this time, if you have a question to any one of the presenters, I would invite you to unmute your mic and direct your question accordingly. I can give you a minute to do that. But in the meantime, for each one of the panelists, definitely one of the things that came through in each one of your presentations is the issue of being able to change some of the systems that are in place. I want us to start to think about some of the pillars of the existing system that needs to change and how some of these changes are going to be implemented and articulated. There is a hand that is up from Mr. Ozzy Warwick. You can unmute your mic and go ahead and deliver your question, Mr. Warwick.
Okay, thank you very much. And of course, good evening to the panel. Here, excellent discussion so far. Very, very good interventions. I just want, before I ask my question, I'm Ozzy Warwick from OWTU and the JTERM. And I just want the panel as well as the audience to know that the Joint Trade Union Movement is in full solidarity and supports the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. And they have the full support of the trade union movement. In terms of my question, we have not been able to resolve the inequalities that have been built into our existing education system, which would have been further exacerbated with the Concordat. So my question is, how do we mitigate further entrenchment of that inequality as we roll out in this COVID period? I believe Comrade Antonia would have given us a very, very good insight as to what is the objective reality on the ground for parents, and one can imagine for students, especially our citizens who are on the lower end of the economic ladder. So how do we mitigate further entrenching the existing inequalities that are there built within our education system? How do we do that as we roll out the new normal, as some people like to say? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warwick. I'm going to invite the panelists to respond in order of their presentations. And what we can also reflect on is some of the existing policies within the ministry and some of the conversations that have been put out by the new Minister of Education. Dr. Dukwa, go ahead.
Dr. Dukwa, you're going to have to unmute your mic, please.
Sorry, yes, indeed. Sorry. Right. So how do we mitigate further inequalities in the system? I think COVID-19 came at an excellent time for us to transform the entire education system so that advantages will be held by all in rural and urban areas. Let the major stakeholders come together and contribute meaningfully, from the availability of internet services for all rural areas to the correct program for SCA students to the ECC pupils. Let us take this gracious opportunity and transform each sector so that all the major stakeholders, tutor, the principals, Ministry of Education, private enterprise, teachers, tertiary education sector can come together and create a new plan, including discussions of instruments such as Concordat.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Dukwa. Ms. Antonio, I just want to add one of the, a question that came from our audience, and I believe you may be best placed to answer it. And the question is as follows. Are there any legal barriers to teachers using video recording to teach students in one class versus another?
Okay, thank you, Madam Moderator. To the first question posed by Comrade Warwick in terms of inequalities and the Concordat. And permit me, Dr. Tiwari, to just borrow one of your elements of being culturally responsive to what we do at this point in time. I agree with Dr. Dukwa that we have an opportunity as a nation to make some changes, some relevant and some much needed changes in our education system. What we must determine, however, would be which of those changes would be our priority. Indeed, the Concordat has been a thorny issue for many years, and it has promoted and sustained particular levels of inequality within the education system. But in our diverse society of Trinidad and Tobago, is it enough to say just to do away with the Concordat? Many of us link the SCA to, or what was common entrance then, to the issue of prestige schools. And so we have the rhetoric, the norm of a prestige school as opposed to a school that's not a prestige school. Good schools as opposed to bad schools. If we are looking to reform and to transform our education system, why not as a state, as a nation, first of all, change our perspective, as Dr. Tiwari suggested, on education? What do we want to educate the children for? Simply to go to a prestige school? And if they don't pass for the prestige school, if they are not placed there, we revile them? Or are we looking to maximize on the child's potential and his ability to contribute as a citizen? If we are working towards the latter, then it suggests that the state and all stakeholders need to make the necessary financial and human and material investment into making all schools schools of excellence. We know for a fact, and the secondary school principals will tell you, for example, that they have not received all that they have required from the school vote to fund all of the things that need to be paid for in the school. Primary school principals in some schools will tell you that they do not receive direct funding. So they have to seek sponsorship. They have to rely on benefactors. Why can't we change our mindset, have the conversation, put the Concordat in the place where it's supposed to be, to deal with our spiritual and religious aspect, and look to rebuild our school system and make all schools institutes of excellence. So regardless of which school you went to, which school you attended, there would be that level of pride, both by you and the community and the society over that school. As to the other question, that's a little more ticklish. I will pass over to Dr. Tiwari and come back to that one. Right, I'll come back to that one.
Oh, all right. I mean, I will try. You see, if we get stuck on the concordat or particular things related to the evolution of the educational system, which were really done, you might say, by political and socio-political negotiation, I think we are going to find ourselves stuck in arguments that were old, coming up in the present time, in a situation where the world has already changed. The truth is, the world is no longer how it was in December 2019. By January, February, March of 2020, the world changed dramatically on us. And Trinidad and Tobago as a place to live, what we have known in the past, changed on us also dramatically. We have found there are inequalities in any society, no matter how wealthy it claims to be, that make large groups of people more vulnerable than others and absolutely exposed to devastation of their families. We have learned is that inequality in a society is very bad, but inequality in the world system is awful, because what it does, it creates conditions in the world system, no matter how the rich nations may protect themselves, that ravage underdeveloped and weaker nations and also threaten the entire global system. So that if we take two issues that I've raised there, one is that the world has changed upon us dramatically at the present time. And secondly, the inequalities of the world system and of every nation have been laid bare, including Trinidad and Tobago's inequalities. Because when we had the problem in March, in April, in May, in June, we had to find food for people. We had to find families that needed to be helped. We needed to make sure health workers had the resources that were required to equip them to be frontline workers and be really the bastions against the spread of this disease. So that we have found out in Trinidad and Tobago, as the world has found out, if you have a system that is unfair, that is unequal, in which institutions are weak, in which capacity is weak in any case, or in which you have large pockets of vulnerable people, then your entire society is jeopardized. That third lesson, then we will understand that unfairness for anybody is unfairness for everybody. Unfairness for the part is unfairness to the whole. And therefore, when you think of things like the Concordat and so on, we have to really think about what kind of education system do we want for our children in the world that they are going to inherit. Already you have a disrupted global economy. The value chain is disrupted. There is a logistical reconfiguration of the world system. You have geopolitics, we know it here because of oil and gas. We have climate change, which affects small islands the most. small islands have peculiar problems and difficulties of development that big countries do not have. We have, including capacity, we have issues of how we make ourselves productive and competitive, how we get into the world of science, technology, artificial intelligence, and allow it to work for us as a small nation to make us competitive and capable in the world. And when we begin to address those things,
so I could hear it.
when we begin to address these things, which include economic viability and sustainability and greater equity and inclusion, we can figure out how we want our schools to operate so that they will be fair to all, recognize multiple talents and abilities, and give people a chance to achieve as they are able to. And therefore, absorbed in an economy that we are planning for and organizing for based on the human resource development we have in our school system. And I think that unless we rethink the model of how you think about these things and not go to a particular problem to solve it, we have to solve that problem in context. The context is much larger now. The equality issue is not just a Trinidad and Tobago problem. It's a world equality issue among countries, different countries, and a world equality issue in individual countries, no matter what countries those are. And in Trinidad and Tobago, if we really want to address the question of equality and equity and equality of opportunity, we have to begin to rethink what kind of society do we want in the context of sustainable development and climate change and economic survival and sustainability? What is the education system we need for a population of approximately 20,000 students a year coming into birth and coming into each class in school? And where is the society headed in terms of planning, organization, and development to allow these people to enjoy a decent and honorable and peaceful and contented sense of self and quality of life?
Great. Thank you very much.
I don't want you to get me wrong. I don't want, it is not that the Concordat is not important. It is important. But if you lose the context, we will end up being quarreling about things that don't get us much further. It will allow us to address part of the problem. You might eliminate elite schools, or you might eliminate the 20%, or you might create the conditions in which tentatively all schools are deemed to be equal and follow equal rules, but you might not solve the problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tawari. For the second round of questions, I am just going to invite our panelists to think about not just proposed interventions, but really some of those priorities that each of them alluded to in their responses. I'm also going to ask Ms. Indira Rampasad to unmute your mic and pose your question directly. Ms. Rampasad. Ms. Indira Rampasad, did you have a question for our panelists? Okay, it seems as though she's away from her computer. Mr. Matthew Noel, please proceed to unmute your mic and ask your question directly.
Right, a pleasant good afternoon to all within this conversation. Mine is not so much of a question, but rather to state a perspective, and the panelists and them can of course, agree or disagree. On the topic of reforming the education system, it has always amazed me, and this is not to take away from what anybody has said prior, especially since this is not my stage. But where education is concerned, we are forever in a situation where we seek to want to make reforms to education when there's turbulence existing. It's almost like waiting until the storm is upon us for you to want to fix the roof. And that is forever going to be problematic for us where that is concerned. Why is it that when things are stable, we don't see the need to want to generate the energies necessary to truly fix our education system? But we wait until that there's a controversy, there's an issue, or to use the local terminology, there's a bacchanal, and that is when we want to go in with a thrust to fix it. I dare say, if we seek to do any type of remediation to something while there's a catastrophe taking place, we really would not do justice to the fixes that have to happen. I would like to hear the panelists and them on that. On the second point of the Concordat continues to be the whipping boy for inequality, not only in our education system, but also in society at large. Why? Because the education system lends to the general society in terms of turning out the caliber of individuals to sustain the national product as it is. The instability in the education system existed long before the Concordat came about. The existence of the Concordat in part was to facilitate the use of physical structures to allow for many other children, disadvantaged as they were, to enter the education system. So the Concordat is but a small facet of what might want to perceive as being the rationale for why our education system might appear to be unfair. The real boogeyman, the real elephant in the room, the real issue to have to treat with where education is concerned is the way our wealth is distributed, is our inability to access wealth in its very infancy, the lack of opportunity, the lack of sustainability, the lack of the system being able to allocate properly how the wealth should be dispersed. It's the lack of meaningful social programs that does not guarantee an evenness of the playing field to allow those who might be perceived as disadvantaged to have that opportunity to be able to achieve. And one of the main things as well is that in wanting to treat with inequality, we tend to always or mainly go to people who are not suffering inequality to have to give the answers for fixing inequality. And we don't go to where the inequality is expressed, where we can really pull from they who actually deal with the inequality so that they can relate to us exactly what they have to go through to make ends meet, what they have to go through to ensure that their children can get a meaningful education. But it is those who already have an education are the ones that speak out on the topic and expect to lead the charge to foster the inequality for those who don't even have a voice in determining the nature of the inequality that they are facing. I would just like for the panelists and them to treat with what I would have just expressed and whatnot. I'm listening.
Mr. Noel, thank you for your questions. Ms. Rampasad, do you have a question?
Yes, sorry about earlier. I was trying to unmute. I'm doing this on my phone, so it was a little challenging. So I apologize for that. So I didn't leave the room. Yes, my question pertains to the same issue of inequality or equality as the case may be. And I agree with Dr. Tiwari that we have to take a wide view of this, a global view of this. I don't think reforming the Concordat is the solution. It's like barely even scratching the surface. This is a global phenomenon. And it's not just developing countries that are facing this. As we can see, many of the developed countries of the world, United States, Europe, Western Europe. These countries are also experiencing difficulties at this time. But I just want to raise the issue of inequality. I'm speaking here now as also president of a union. I'm president of WIGAT, the West Indian Group of University Teachers at UWI. That it also pertains not just to students, but to teachers as well. So when we want to look at this issue of inequality, we want to look at inequality amongst the teaching system, because we have had members who also have challenges, some not very tech savvy, some without the necessary or adequate facilities because they have children who use them now that the kids are also home. Some without a designated space in the home for teaching, internet connectivity, all kinds of problems. And our teachers hail from far and wide across the country. Not all are in urban areas or developed areas. Some are also from rural areas. So I'm not just speaking about university teachers here. I was also a teacher at secondary school for a long time, so I know what that is about. So we would want to look at the problems our students encounter and are encountering, given the new environment, and given this new, this is a new global normal. But we also want to look at the other stakeholders. The parents have their challenges too, and now parents have a problem. If school is closed until December, what are they going to do? How are they going to do their work, those who have to go to work, and at the same time take care of the kids at home, because the kids can't be out and about with the virus escalating as it is. There is that other challenge. But we also have to look at our teachers and the challenges that they are facing. So we have to look at all the stakeholders, and we have to take a broad perspective. We have to take that global perspective that Dr. Tiwari emphasizes. It is critical. This is not a one-step fix-it. Inequality, when we look at the education system, the Concordat, like I said, might be a part of it. We have to look at that whole junior and secondary school system that had emerged, and which we try to fix by converting them to 5-year or 7-year school, and whether that has really resolved the problem, because the problem remains, you see, and the kinds of disciplinary issues that you face with the students, some of them, where has it emerged? Where did it come from? Where did it come from? Where is it going? Where did it come from? And some of these issues are global. There are a lot of problems with teenagers and young kids in the United Kingdom, for example, gangs in the United Kingdom. It's not just developing countries, I want to stress. So I will stop there, and it's a comment I am making. I'm not really asking a question, because these I think we need to think about. These are issues I think we need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rampersad. And as a last question, I'm going to ask Ms. Ved Bishop to unmute your mic and ask your question.
Good night to the panel. I know that there are some concerns about how children, especially with special needs, are going to adapt to this new normal remote learning. Does anyone of you have any comments on that?
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Bishop. So panel, I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to answer. Dr. Dukwa, please unmute your mic in your response.
Thank you, Dr. Gookool. Yes, we've had quite a lot to think about and therefore to respond to. But let me address, based on my 30 odd years of teaching over the ECC, primary, secondary, tertiary education sectors, I'm using that as the information base together with my reading of international educational systems and so on. So all my experiences will come together now to address a few concerns. And indeed, the first one I will want to address is the priorities. What are our priorities? I would like to suggest that our priorities be the setting of goals. What are the goals for the ECC sector? What are the goals for primary, secondary, tertiary? What do we expect as an output of our education system? So that goal setting and planning is critical for our or are critical issues for our people, our nation. And I'm also suggesting that we need to take advantage of the fast forward track that COVID-19 has placed us on for the online education systems and exploring all advantages of online education. Yes, in terms of special needs, I see us having a blended approach, simply because we do not want to exclude our special children from that exposure of online education. There is a place for them. And therefore that sector, the special needs sector, would have to explore how best do we get our special children to adapt to this new normal as well. It can be done. So that in terms of priorities, I want to suggest that we set goals for each sector within our system. Why do we wait for turbulence before we reform in education? Perhaps it's what causes us to think, and perhaps our backs are against a wall and we have no choice but to rethink how we do things. You see, the Minister of Education has spent quite a lot of time producing a 10-page document on the way forward, and quite an extensive list. So we want to congratulate her, but we need to have a lot more of the inequality addressed in our systems. The rural-urban drift, we need to address that. Issues such as the Concordat, why not invite the churches to discuss same and update same? It has been quite a while since we have had that enforced. And therefore, that collaboration between community, ministry, private sector must happen in order for our education sector to be transformed meaningfully. So I leave the rest for other members of the panel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dukwa. Ms. Antonia?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And before I get into the question, before I get into the observations and questions from the second round, there was a question left over from the first round when someone asked if there were any legal barriers to teachers recording themselves as part of video presentations for students. There are no barriers per se, but definitely we will have to consider the issues of intellectual property as well as the issues of privacy, because we must question who will monitor these presentations done by the teachers, as well as perhaps how they may be perverted. This is uncharted territory, and definitely as union, as ministry, as legislators, we will need to address that particular situation. In terms of the priorities, and if I may take all of the issues and put them within one context, we need to, as I said, as my third aspect, build resilience within our education system. Part of that, building that resilience, has to do with the planning. The question was asked, why do we only wait until a crisis to seek reform? Maybe because that's when we get the eureka moments and we recognize we have a chance to start afresh. But each opportunity to rebuild or revamp or reinvent must be taken as part of a larger strategy. In this instance, bringing everything together, we have the opportunity to deal with some of the inequalities within our education system. We have, as the last government, current government, out of their National Development Strategy 2030, they set particular goals for each sector, for each level of the education system, with the ultimate outcome of having well-balanced, well-rounded citizens who would make viable contributions to the society and nurture one another and so forth. To break that down into action plans would mean that in the first instance, we need to do a diagnostic test, an assessment of what currently exists within the education system. Dr. Ramprasad spoke about inequality in terms of educators, and we talk about educators at all levels. Are we aware, for example, that educators who operate at the ECCE level in our state-run ECCE schools are on contract, and that sometimes they have challenges receiving contract gratuity or having the contract renewed, and that these educators are not part of the formal education system as identified by the Education Act of Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, they have no place in education according to our legislation. These are some of the inequalities we have to fix if we are looking to build resilience in our education system, rectify the issues of staffing and human resource development. Dr. Ramprasad, again, permit me the reference, is the president of WIGOT. And from both Dr. Ramprasad and Dr. Dukwa, as well as Dr. Tiwari, to a lesser extent, we heard about the issue of education at the tertiary level. But there are tertiary institutions in our country where staff do not have security of tenure, where staff do not receive their pay on time. COSTAT is a prime example. The COSTAT Act of 20 that established COSTAT made provision for a faculty senate to be a multilateral body, to have lecturers, college management, stakeholders, students, and so forth. That's in the act. And because of a lack of political will by various administrations, the college does not have a faculty senate. So the board can do what it wants, essentially. So what we have is a state entity disregarding the legislation and the way something is supposed to operate. Now, if that inequality is not addressed, it will continue. And that's what we find happening. So as a society, we need to have some hard conversations. Conversations about inequality, not just in terms of students. You notice in my presentation, colleagues, I deliberately did not refer to students so much, and I refer to parents and educators. Conversations about inequality, conversations about race and how those things impact on education, because those two impact on education. Conversations about the different children in our system. The question was asked, what about special needs children? How are we going to build resilience as a country for special needs persons when we do not have a national special needs policy or policy on special education and on special needs persons? And it seems as if some of us have only just awoken and realized we have special needs children in the education system. We can't talk about priorities if we don't acknowledge some of the bigger issues in the system. There is no way at this point in time you will get certain children with certain categories of special needs to sit behind a computer to participate in online learning. And of course, we forget that there are children with special needs in the mainstream schools, children with learning and behavioral disabilities who require support in addition to what the class teacher has to provide. Teachers' aides, student aides. In the special schools, we need to have the school nurses, the student aides. But you know what? We don't see these support positions as integral to our education system. In the United States, the two teachers' unions, American Federation of Teachers and the Education Association, they both incorporate educators at all levels, the support staff, the cafeteria staff, the ancillary staff. All of these persons are members of the unions. It happens in jurisdictions in Europe as well. Until we start to recognize, colleagues, that building resilience in the education sector cannot be done as a top-down activity, but must incorporate everybody and involve everybody in the discussions, then that particular priority is going to beat us every time. And we will always be left behind. And as Dr. Tiwari said, not be able to provide our children with the skills and capacities to compete in this new global environment. I will pause here.
Thank you very much for your comments. Dr. Tiwari, I hand over to you.
Yeah, well, I'll respond to two issues that were raised very, very quickly, briefly. One is the issue of why do these things emerge? Why do we talk about reform of education in turbulence? Because it is only when you have a sense of crisis that you realize that the education system is really the center of both the capture, all right, and the custodianship of your intellectual capital, and responsible also for the output of the intellectual capital that must solve your problems, identify them, and find solutions for them. And therefore, in a crisis situation, education and what we use our education system for, and what we teach, and how we teach, and what kind of curriculum we have, and how we make the distinctions between or among the talents of children. How do we give them a pathway that allows them to thrive? Those things become very important under crisis conditions. When things are going okay, you don't worry about it too much. The second thing is that I believe that we must benefit from the experience of COVID in a real way. And that really is, it has to do with a question that was posed by one of the speakers before, in which he said, why must we ask the educated to give us solutions to problems? Why don't we ask the people who are experiencing the problems what their problems are? Well, you need both. You need to know what the problems are, and the only way you can do that is by investigation. It is by articulation by the people who have their problems. And it is by researchers and academics and social workers documenting these things so that you have a public record of these things. So I think we need to benefit from the COVID experience to see how different aspects of society have been affected, and the extent to which this can become an input in the design of a system that is more equitable, responsive, and resilient to trauma and changes and tragedies in the society. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that COVID has disrupted the society, it has disrupted our social norms or institutions or human relations, life as we know it. And this will have to be reconfigured. We are reconfiguring it now. And when we find a vaccine, there are some things that we might go back to, and there are some things that we might retain, having learned in the COVID experience. But as Ms. Antonio was saying, there is always the next crisis. There is always the next thing that you have to prepare for. And you have to be resilient enough to be able to adapt and confront that challenge when it presents itself. So I think looking at the local society, the national society, and even our regional context, we can learn something from this experience. We can document it, and we can use it as a means of affecting policy and strategy for a more sensible and equitable approach to development in the society. The second thing is that we have to look at where the world was going before COVID. And it was a world that was consumed with the issues of climate change, sustainable development, competitiveness, creativity, and innovation, entrepreneurship and skills, custodianship of things, the management and development of things, whether business, government, institutions of society, such as government institutions, unions, civil society institutions, and concerned about the issue of ethics in this society, because one of the ethical issues that have come up in the world because of COVID is the difference is whether you're going to have democracy and freedom and the large numbers of people having an equitable existence, or whether you're going to have oligarchy in which money and political power coalesce to keep those people out of the opportunities that they should have. And I think the framework of climate change responses and sustainable development allow us to see that we cannot support oligarchy, that we must support democracy and freedom, and we must support equity, opportunity, and equality. I think those things have become clear now with the COVID crisis. But where is the world headed after COVID? And I cannot predict, nobody really knows where that world is going. But I can tell you from reading latest reports about what kinds of jobs we're going to have, what kind of industries we have, because of what COVID has triggered at a much faster, much more accelerated rate, is that this is going to be the world of the future. Data and artificial intelligence are going to become vitally important. They are going to become the #1 issue in the world. Engineering and cloud computing are going to be vital for any society that wants to stay among the knowledgeable and informed nations of the world. People and culture are going to be important because you're still going to have to deal with people. You're going to deal with human institutions. You're going to have those things. Now, that is something we are very strong in. We play the fool sometimes, and we cuss each other up, and we get on, and we have ethnic divisions, and we have religious intolerance, and so on. But by and large, we are very strong on the issue of people and culture and caring and being able to mix easily, fraternize easily, and to be able to work with each other. That is a strength that we can build on. Product development. I mean, Carnival is our big thing. Tourism has really crashed a whole aspect of the world economy, including the whole Caribbean economy. And Carnival is related to tourism. That is something in which product development was important. So what we have now is an opportunity to look at how we can use the time when there is no travel, there is no tourism, etc., to design products and things that are possible when the world returns to some kind of reasonable normal with regard to travel and tourism and entertainment and so on. And we can also look at other industries in which we can develop the products and the things that we are able to market and sell, because diversification needs to proceed apace, and oil and gas has become a kind of liability to the revenue side of our balance sheet. The other things that are important are sales, marketing, and content development. So those are things that we can think about. What do we have to sell? What do we have to market? What is the content that we need to make that we are prepared to share with the world and they are willing to buy? The care economy, everything from health to anything that has to do with caring for people, that is a big thing. And the green economy is going to be big in the world. Now think of the things that I told you just now about climate change, sustainable development, and so on, and think of these things, and think of the gap that we have, given where we are, where the world was headed pre-COVID, where it will continue to go post-COVID, and where it is headed, driven by artificial intelligence and data-driven technology. And think of the gap we have and what we have to do to deal with that. And let me tell you, all my colleagues here today, everybody who are part of the participatory group here today, I want to say to you, education is absolutely central to that. But you cannot treat education as if it were one thing in a society that would get you to where you want to go. You have to take a holistic view of where your society is, where it has come from, where you would like to go given the world context, and what are the vital things that we must do together in order to get there. And I feel that given the very, very excellent conversation that we've had here tonight, if we got people together in the right context, we could have a whole nation speaking to purposeful endeavor and creating the conditions where we could have a strategic purpose that is shared, with education playing a vital role in that process.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari, and to the rest of the panel as well. There is one person with their hand up, Ms. Pamela Guzman-Dixon. Please unmute your mic and direct your questions accordingly.
Good evening to the panel.
Evening.
Of a concern to me in education is the aspect of training. For instance, we have been doing an online training for teachers or educators, for one, more so, and it was recommended in that training, British Columbia document, that with the online learning that is to be done, it is recommended that a weekly schedule be made by the children themselves instead of a daily schedule. Nonetheless, in the curriculum guidelines sent out by the Ministry of Education, on pages 4 and 5, it's a daily schedule for the children and teachers to adhere to. So what to me is alarming is that the ministry has sponsored a course. Teachers and educators have acquired knowledge, but yet what is to be practiced is incongruent with that training. That is one aspect of training. Another aspect is training that was not done, but yet still it was advertised, it was done. Next, for instance, all right. I am a counselor. It was advertised that online counseling training was given to counselors. To my knowledge, that is not so. So therefore, we are being asked to do something that we weren't trained for, and that is unethical in itself. Dr. Tiwari mentioned about ethics, and a number of things are being asked to be done, which is unethical in a professional capacity because you have not been trained for it. So for me, for education to take place, there must be some level of training. And when training is done, it should be allowed to be put into practice, because this training would have been based on research done by Commonwealth nations or professionals from the Commonwealth nations, especially the online training that is going on now for teachers. But yet still, we have rolled out a document stating otherwise, going against the recommendation by that institution or body. And also with training, sometimes we are asked to do things, though we may be qualified. For example, bank workers, just observations. Though you have the qualification, they come into the institution, they are trained. For instance, to managers, before they are placed in that role, there's a managerial training for them over a period of time before they are given the title. Not being given the title or position and then being asked to operate in a capacity that they were not trained for. And arising out of this online teaching, I'm foreseeing some challenges that may materialize in the future as a counselor: mental health issues, an increase in mental health issues for children, family relations, and eye health. Though we will be putting resources into this aspect of it, further down the road, we may have to channel resources into those three arms. So therefore, the training aspect is one aspect should be looked at seriously within the field of education for education reform to take place. That's my contribution.
Thank you. Thank you very much, panel. I am going to ask you to respond to the comments posted by this audience member and also to offer your closing remarks as we wrap up for the evening. So, Dr. Duqua, may I ask you to go first?
Yes, no problem, Dr. Bosland. Thank you very much to all our participants and all the organizers on my own behalf. I think the previous speaker put it so well, I could not say it better myself. But there needs to be ethical considerations in all aspects of our operations, especially because we are educators. In closing, I want to say that COVID-19 has forced us to operate within a fast-tracked, transformed normal. I really pray that all major stakeholders, private sector, Ministry of Education officials, minister, teachers, religious sector, parents, community tutor, and students would create a unique Trinidad and Tobago by contributing meaningfully to a plan so that all sectors, in all sectors of our education system, no member of staff or student is left behind. I thank you graciously.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duqua. Ms. De Freitas, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In response to the observation, we again see the issue of the knee-jerk reaction by the state. I would want to suggest that we, as Ministry of Education and as state, as government, look at how we are going to strategically develop our human resources. There will be short-term impacts such as now, and the training that Ms. Dixon spoke to will treat with that, but there will also be long-term implications. And this, as was said before, we will need collaboration by all stakeholders to ensure the best is done for our students. I would want to suggest that this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of discussing education and how it has been impacted by COVID-19. And I look forward to subsequent discussions along these lines when perhaps we can arrive at the point where we can actually have the level of advocacy required to effect particular changes. Do have a blessed evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freitas. Dr. Tiwari?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I want to say much respect to all the participants and the people who asked questions. I found all of it but interesting, and some of it very, very who were talking with their experiential knowledge of what they were talking about, and I found that very touching. I mean, I think all of us are educators in one form or the other, and we have to ask the question: what is education for? At the end of the day, it is supposed to help a person to find a reasonable place in a sustainable world in keeping with their skills, talents, orientation, passions, and which then allows us to experience life, to celebrate and experience our humanity, to allow us to share with others what we know and them to share with us what we don't know, and to contribute to a more sustainable society and world. Now, what this means is that the education system is supposed to create builders of society. It's supposed to create builders of civilization. It's supposed to be creating builders of family and community and the larger and wider social fabric. And therefore, it is not just about information and skills. The the cluster of professions and fields that I read to you just now was really from the World Economic Forum, which had done a sense of what they felt we needed to do up to about 2020. And then 2020 came and they had to revise everything in the context of what they were learning from the response to COVID. And they projected it to 2022 and 2023. So I'm not talking about 2025 or 2030. I'm talking about next year, the year after that. And that is the world that is coming at us at the speed of light. You know, it is important to appreciate that because human survival depends on our being able to master that. But the survival of our own island nation state, not the whole planet. We want the whole planet to survive and we want to contribute to that by what we do here. But the survival of this twin island state really demands that we be a little more thoughtful, a little less antagonistic, a little more cooperative and collaborative, a little more solution oriented, a little more purposeful for the development of people on a more equitable basis so that we can create the conditions for a more genuinely equitable society. Now, I don't think that is too much to ask, but it does take a certain kind of context and framework to be able to do that. And I feel, given what I've experienced here today, that I feel we have people in the society who are willing to work towards solutions and creating a better society. And when we think that education is about our children, and when we think about education as being about ambition and fulfillment of life's purpose, we cannot afford to fail or to make mistakes. with those things. And if we have a crisis now and we have the opportunity to see more clearly because of the crisis, then we must use that opportunity in order to fashion a system that will get us to a more sustainable world and a more sustainable Trinidad and Tobago and the region. Because whatever we do here, other people in the region will follow. And I think it will help the region immensely, because one island in the Caribbean cannot survive on its own. We really need to have the region lift each other up and lift itself up. And we need to take the discussion across the islands as well.
Great.
I appreciate the opportunity to contribute here, and I want to thank you very, very much. Dr. Hussein, thank you very much for making it possible, and Rebecca, thank you very much. And all of you, thank you.
Thank you very much, panel, for your time and for lending of your expertise, and to the participants for spending the evening with us. We really did enjoy your company. Look out for our fortnightly conversations. For our next 2-week session, we are likely going to cover some of the pre-budget conversations. So look out for some of those ads and look out for some of those indicators. To everyone, good night and have a pleasant evening, and stay safe, everyone. Bye.
Hello.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, good night, everyone, and thanks for logging on. The next session would involve something, Dr. Tiwari, if you are still there, on donut economics and the pre-budget environment. I think it is something that would serve the country very useful in the upcoming budget session. And so I took quite a few numbers. Rebecca took quite a few numbers, and we will blast it out to everyone. So thanks all for taking part.
All right, thanks for
Have a good
organizing it. I appreciated it.
Bye.